Now, it's hard to believe it has only been 2 weeks since the shock and awe phase of this campaign began. It seems like such a long time, particularly for those folks who are in Baghdad itself, having endured almost relentless bombing. Of course, that bombing has been targeted very specifically at the Saddam Hussein regime itself. But once again, it has only been 2 weeks since the shock and awe portion of this campaign has begun. It was right after that bombing that took place when we saw a briefing 2 weeks ago. They waited until the main portion of shock and awe had completed before Don Rumsfeld came on. We are ironically waiting now for a press conference from the Pentagon. It won't be Don Rumsfeld. It will be Victoria Clark. There you see on the left-hand side of the screen. But our own Kelly Wright has been standing by. Kelly, anybody at the Pentagon tell you what's going on in Baghdad right now?
Well, basically, we were talking earlier about the appearance of Saddam Hussein, and senior officials here say that it's unlikely that that would be Saddam Hussein parading through the streets of Baghdad, particularly when you look at live pictures of what's going on there right now. More than likely, they're looking at this with a great degree of skepticism. And of course, we know that we are approaching the gates of Baghdad, particularly after the Army's third ID has taken control of the Saddam International Airport, changing the name to Baghdad International. We're looking at the video now that's in question. We will likely hear from the Pentagon officials describing this and discussing it. That will take place about a minute or two from now. We're waiting for Victoria Clark to arrive and give us the briefing of what's unfolding in Baghdad right now, even as we speak. But apparently there is some bombing. As you know, the relentless bombing campaign has been promised that it will continue. CENTCOM, of course, has been conducting this kind of campaign for the past 15 days now. The Pentagon officials saying that for the first 15 days of this war, things have gone pretty much as planned. And I must tell you that earlier today, the Marines wiped out the Al-Nida division of the Republican Guard. As you may recall, David, the Baghdad and Medina divisions have also been wiped out. There are 3 divisions remaining, and there are even reports that some of the Nebuchadnezzar division has also been degraded, greatly degraded.
Kelly, just another thing that's coming into us. Once again, as Tori Clark and Brigadier General Stanley McChrystal are walking their way toward the podium there at DOD, there's a report on Reuters that there once again is a big explosion that has hit a presidential complex in central Baghdad. This at the same time that the Iraqi government is promising suicide raids against the coalition in Baghdad. Perhaps this will be a question that's going to be brought up in minutes from now. Once again, Tori Clark and Brigadier General Stanley McChrystal live at DOD.
And the incredible men and women of the coalition forces are making good progress. That progress does not come easily. We reflect every day that a number of our troops have made the ultimate sacrifice for their country, and our heart breaks to hear of each one lost. We salute their remarkable dedication and their bravery, and their families are in our thoughts and prayers. Several journalists have died as well, trying to tell the very important story of this war. And I know that many people in this building and this town knew Mike Kelly, who was killed last night just south of Baghdad. Mike was just a phenomenal journalist with an enthusiasm for his work that was surpassed only by his passion for his family. And our condolences go out today to Madeline, his wife, and his children and his parents. Our troops are accomplishing our goals in Iraq, and these include, and it's always good to go back and take a look at these, ending the regime of Saddam Hussein, destroying any facilities or groups involved in global terrorism and weapons of mass destruction, securing the oil fields, providing humanitarian relief, and helping the Iraqi people move towards self-government. As we've said before, many bad things that could have happened have not thus far. The oil fields have not been destroyed. There is not a humanitarian crisis or a mass exodus of refugees. Iraq has not yet fired missiles at Israel or Jordan, and chemical weapons have not been used yet. At the same time, some very good things have happened. Out in the field, we have seriously weakened the divisions of Saddam Hussein and are securing the Baghdad airport, a very important location. More and more Iraqi troops are realizing every day that they are in a lost cause and are leaving their positions, going home or surrendering to our troops. We continue to deliver a tremendous amount of food to the Iraqi people including some straight from the United States. We have a few photographs of wheat being loaded onto a ship at the port of Galveston, Texas. The ship, which is named the Free Atlas, is carrying about 28,000 tons of wheat, nearly 1 pound of flour for every man, woman, and child in Iraq. Another 28,000 tons were loaded on the Yellow Rose earlier in the week for delivery to Iraq. We are also delivering something else in Iraq. On Wednesday, this baby, only two hours old in this photo, was delivered by a medical team from the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit. Unlike previous generations in Iraq, this girl will have a chance to grow up in a place of hope and freedom. The regime we are ousting clearly would do just about anything to hold on to power and abuse its people. In many locations, the enemy continues to use schools, hospitals, and mosques as places of war. In dozens of classrooms, literally dozens of classrooms, coalition troops continue to find mortar rounds, rocket-propelled grenades, anti-personnel mines, and anti-tank mines. There have also been reports from embedded reporters of Iraqi facilities that look like they may have been used for torture. One television report showed the desk of a police chief or a jail warden containing the identification cards of several Iraqis. As many of you know, a person could be punished severely for traveling in Iraq without an identification card. So the question is obvious: why did those men no longer need their cards? The fear and the terror is starting to evaporate in Iraq. Many of them feel free enough to cheer the arrival of the coalition forces. A recent story in the New York Times said, quote, "People rushed to greet them, the soldiers, crying out repeatedly, 'Thank you, this is beautiful.' 2 questions dominated the crowd. Will you stay, and can you tell me what time Saddam is finished?" Asked what else the people wanted, residents pointed to a building from which they said rocket-propelled grenades were launched and asked the military to remove them. As we near the end of the regime, we have to remember and underscore repeatedly that the very toughest fighting could lie ahead. It's quite possible that what's left of the Iraqi regime will continue or even escalate their horrible tactics of using civilians as hostages and shields for their own protection. In Baghdad, we continue to see the enemy putting military assets in and around schools, hospitals, mosques, homes, embassies, clearly hoping to blame any civilian deaths on the coalition forces. The regime is fooling nobody, and the end is inevitable. As the President said yesterday at Camp Lejeune, no scheme of this enemy, no crime of a dying regime will divert us from our mission. We will not stop until Iraq is free. General.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. I'd also like to express my condolences to families and loved ones of all those we've lost in the conflict. Operation Iraqi Freedom continues. General Brooks covered the last 24 hours of operations in detail during the CENTCOM brief earlier today, so I'll be brief. Currently, the coalition has a substantial number of forces on the ground at Baghdad International Airport and will begin to increase our scope of control over additional areas nearby. We are still sporadically engaging forces on the airport grounds and clearing buildings there. Further east, Marines are continuing to push towards Baghdad from Al-Qut, and we're continuing to engage any remaining elements of some Republican Guard divisions defending the outskirts of Baghdad. Yesterday, coalition aircraft flew more than 1,000 sorties over Iraq, focusing on regime leadership targets and Republican Guard forces. Coalition forces have fired more than 750 cruise missiles and have now expended over 14,000 precision-guided munitions since Operation Iraqi Freedom began. I have 3 videos for you today. The first one is of an F-16 dropping a precision-guided weapon on Iraqi troops in their vehicle hiding in an orchard near Haditha. The next 2 videos are of F-15s dropping precision-guided munitions on MiG-21s parked in a revetment in the vicinity of Ar-Ramadi. And with that, we'll be happy to take your questions.
Charlie.
Tory, what does the Pentagon and U.S. intelligence make of television pictures from Baghdad, apparently from Baghdad today, of a figure purported to be that of Saddam Hussein in rubble that could have been caused since the bombing started.
I think apparently is a good word. We have no idea where the tapes have come from. Don't have anything for you on the tapes themselves. I just don't think it's that significant what may or may not be in tapes or when they may have been made. We haven't seen him publicly, and what really matters is not whether or not he's dead or alive, but the fact of whoever is left in this regime, whatever is left of the regime leadership, got up today and realized they have less and less control of their country. They have less and less control of just about everything in that country, and that's what's significant. And what we're focused on is ending the regime.
If it is Saddam, are you concerned that he's alive and able to exhort people to continue fighting?
I'm not going to speculate on any hypotheticals. What we are focused on is continuing the kind of progress we've made thus far. I think about what has happened in 2 weeks. Think about how far the forces have come. Think about the domination and the supremacy in the air. Think about our special forces everywhere. Think about what we have saved for the Iraqi people. And again, whatever is left of this leadership, they got up today and looked around and realized they have very little control of their country.
But you said again, you weren't going, I'm sorry, you said you weren't going to speculate, and yet you seem to indicate that it didn't matter whether he was alive or dead. Is this building concerned that he might still be alive, kicking and exhorting people to fight?
Well, we focus on results, and the results are that the coalition forces have made some pretty extraordinary progress in 2 weeks. We still have some tough work ahead. As I said, as we close in on Baghdad, we have great concern about whether or not they would use WMD, for instance. We realize that some of the fighting from a desperate, dying regime could be pretty intense, but that's what we're focused on.
Sorry,
Jamie.
just one thing that's, whether or not these tapes are genuine or pre-taped or whether Saddam is alive or dead, one thing that's clear is that the Iraqi regime is still using television images to create the perception that the regime remains in control to some extent. I guess I would ask both of you, how long will that be permitted to continue? And do you have any sense of whether these images that we're seeing are being seen in Iraq, or are they only broadcast externally on satellites, or are they broadcast internally?
My understanding is that the communications and what people in Iraq can see and not see or hear or not hear is up and down. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. So I have no idea what they're actually seeing. I do know, and people are demonstrating this, more and more people in this country are beginning to realize that the regime is going to be gone. The very fact that they are coming out and greeting coalition forces, the fact that they are pointing coalition forces to caches of arms and weapons and telling them where some of these, the death squad headquarters are, for instance, that demonstrates increasingly what they increasingly believe about the results of what's going on with the regime.
What about Iraqi television as a, which has already been identified as a legitimate military target? Why is it still able to exert a force?
Well, the regime determined early on that one of its primary mechanisms for controlling the population and exerting coercion was through its media. And it has a very redundant system, starting with fixed sites to include mobile vans that it uses to put out its signal. Clearly, we've degraded that significantly, and we believe that it is sporadic at best, but it is still important. And we find it interesting that Saddam Hussein, if he is alive, feels the need to walk in the street to prove that. What we don't see is effective command and control from his level. We do see some sort of regime command and control, but effective military command and control, which is normally emanated from the core of the regime, has not been apparent on the battlefield.
But do you plan to take out Iraqi television or take over Iraqi television at some point?
We intend to limit their ability to use those mechanisms to control the population.
And we're also communicating with the Iraqi people in a variety of ways, such as Commando Solo. We've been communicating regularly with them. Bill?
It was reported today that a Marine colonel has been relieved of duty. Why was he relieved of duty, and was it related to the investigation of 2 Marines who drowned several days ago in the Sudan Canal?
I don't have anything for you on it. I got asked that question by a reporter, and that's all I know.
It would only be appropriate to let his chain of command discuss that.
Tori,
Let's go right here and then we'll come back.
Major General McChrystal, could you categorize the remaining fighting strength of the Republican Guard divisions, excepting Medina and Baghdad, which have already been spoken of at this podium? And can you also describe or characterize your level of anxiety about this threat today from the Information Minister that tonight, specifically, unconventional, non-military means would be used against coalition forces at the airport?
Sure. We believe that the Republican Guard, which consisted of 6 divisions, now is missing 2 of those divisions, essentially in their entirety, the Medina and Baghdad divisions. There may be a few remnants of those wandering around. But the situation of the other 4 is very confused because we know that they moved parts of those divisions around, and in fact they have become intermixed with some of the other elements on the battlefield. We believe that overall each of those remaining 4 divisions has been significantly attrited to this point, significantly degraded. I won't put a number on it, but those remaining 4 are nothing like what they started the battle. Now, our level of concern over the surprise or unexpected activity, we went into this operation expecting the unexpected. And from car bombings to the potential use of weapons of mass destruction, we've had to stay postured for sort of anything that the regime is capable of using. So at this point, we are just postured for that. We have no particular threat that we consider more than another.
Tom.
Well, my question was along the same lines about sort of what happened to the Republican Guard. The embedded reporters along the way have been saying that they have not seen the evidence of this destruction that they expected to see, and they've been quoting the troops that they're going along with that they're continuously surprised at how light the resistance is. I guess that just from a layman's point of view, that raises the question of the rope-a-dope strategy of somehow, they're holding back and ready to pull a surprise. Is that a concern at this point?
It's always something that we pay attention to, but I would tell you, I think what they're seeing is the doctrine and the synergy at work. The way we are designed to fight in our fighting is to use intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets to identify enemy locations and then use our air and long shooters, our ATACMs, MLRS, and artillery to attrit enemy forces so that when we finally close in ground combat, in fact, it's not an even fight. What we believe we saw in the Baghdad and Medina divisions is we had attrited both of those formations, both materially and also morally, to the point where when the first MEF, the Marines came on the Baghdad division, and then when 3rd ID hit the Medina division, they were incapable of a coherent defense. Now, there were some point contacts that were very violent, and the soldiers and Marines had fought through some sharp fights. But the fabric, the cohesion of the defense isn't there. They may be able to pull it together, but there's no evidence of that yet.
There have been several reports today from Iraq of chemicals or suspected chemicals being found in various places, Nasiriyah and other places. Are you able to shed any light on what you know about that?
Really nothing new to report. We're in a lot of different places. The first primary objective, obviously, is to win the war and finish the war. We have a lot of people that will be going into potential or suspected sites. It's hard work. It will take a long time. I have nothing new to report. In a lot of these places, I know, for instance, they have found defensive equipment and supplies, which says something. But again, it's not hard to speculate. These are people who have used chemicals against their own people. The potential for them to do it again is real. So we have nothing new to report on finding WMD, but just in the name of managing expectations, we've said we've got a primary mission here, which is to finish the war, which we can continuing to do, and then a second primary objective, which is finding and destroying the WMD, but nothing new to report.
Some materials have been found that are being examined or tested in some?
In some places they have gotten in enough that they can take documents and equipment and samples, but nothing to report back to you on it.
Can you help us to understand one of the points, one of the arguments made by the administration on the war criminals tag? Obviously, the administration has seen a number of irregular practices on the part of the Iraqis. One of them in particular puzzles me. When they take off their uniforms and fight in civilian clothes, why is that a war crime? Because U.S. Special Forces do it and did it in Afghanistan. They didn't behave in the same way, but why is the act of fighting without a uniform considered a war crime?
I'm not a lawyer, so I might get part of this wrong, but having grown up in that business, part of it is the action, what you do when you're not in uniform. If a force is going to engage in combat, is going to fight, it must wear a uniform or some kind of uniform. Law of land warfare says armbands or some distinctive marking that allows combatants to be identified from civilians. In these cases, the use of civilian clothing was expressly for the purpose of acting in a combatant way while hiding the fact that they were combatants, similar to the false surrenders, using the law of war and the sure knowledge that we would follow that against coalition forces.
That goes to the behavior, but U.S. forces in Afghanistan and U.S. forces now in Iraq are not in uniform and do not, some of them are not in uniform and do not have specific designations that they are, in fact, American soldiers.
I'd actually like to take that question because I don't think you're right about that. No, we'll take the question and we'll get back to you, but I don't think you're right about that.
That they are somehow designated as U.S. soldiers?
We will take the question, but my understanding is that they are designated as such. Alex.
General, are U.S. coalition forces under any special instructions?
You don't need to answer his question now.
Are coalition forces under any special instructions if they come across Saddam Hussein or any of the other senior leaders who are considered most wanted? And secondly, outside of the Kurdish territory, are we currently working with any armed groups in Iraq, or have we armed any Iraqis to work with us?
I'm not sure whether we've armed any elements outside of the Turkish or the Kurdish area. We are working with elements in many of the areas, Shia elements in southern cities, to try to help them identify and help us identify some of the irregular forces that have been operating there. So clearly we are working with populations to try to give them the ability to remove the regime figures in the area.
And as far as any special instructions to our forces vis-a-vis Saddam Hussein or any of the other senior most wanted?
Not things we would discuss from here. Eric.
General McChrystal, every day we see on the briefing and at the Pentagon Briefing, they talk a little bit about Special Operations Force and Special Forces activity. But given your own background, can you characterize for us how extensive these operations are in Iraq and how they compare historically to other campaigns, particularly ones you've been involved in?
Sure. They are more extensive in this campaign than any I have seen. Probably as a percentage of effort, they are unprecedented for a war that also has a conventional part to it. In fact, in the north, significant special operations presence, working with the Kurdish groups, helping achieve stability, helping to bring in the 173rd Airborne when it came. In the west, a large area denial mission, very, very effective at this point, to include the point attack of a number of specific targets, airfields, potential weapons of mass destruction sites, some command and control headquarters, and then in the south, some aid to the conventional forces, some reconnaissance and whatnot, and then additionally some of the work in some of the cities to help the Shia elements. So it's probably the most effective and the widest use of special operations forces in recent history, clearly.
Can we just follow on that? Early on, Ms. Clark, I think you said there were hundreds of special operations forces in. Obviously, that number has gone up. Can you give us a ballpark figure of the amount of special operations people in the country?
Probably not.
It's a lot.
Enough. Tony.
General, can I go back to one of the threats that hasn't materialized, the use of chemical and biological weapons? What are some of the military factors at play that have prevented the use of whatever inventory they might have? And I'm not asking you to repeat the PSYOPs warnings from the podium, but what's been at play here? And at some point, the public's going to start wondering, has the Bush administration overplayed this? They might not have the inventory we thought they have. Can you also lay out what they are suspected of having right now in terms of 155s, 122 millimeter rockets, delivery systems that they could actually use right now after 2 weeks of pounding, relentless pounding from the air?
Sure. I got to start with the IO part because I believe it is key, and that is identifying the people who give the order or execute it as war criminals, making sure they know that, because we think that's a big component of deterrence. The next part of it is suppression of their capability, and what we've done with that is we've used air, long-range shooters like ATACMS and MLRS. We've also used SOF to go at all the capabilities they have to launch, which are their rocket systems, their long-range artillery. We believe they have capability in both of those modes to launch chemical and biological weapons. So in every case, we've gone to destroy the launch capabilities or to at least suppress them from being able to launch, to include having a system called time-sensitive targeting. And that's a series of aircraft in the air, and every time a sensor of any kind, be it a person on the ground or a collection asset like a Predator, identifies one, those aircraft are there for the express purpose of attacking that immediately. And that has a destruction and a deterrence capability to it. Then the next part of the defense against this is the effective defenses we have. The Patriot, which is engaged effectively against their surface-to-surface missiles. Then our own protective measures that we have. Chemical and biological weapons aren't going to affect the operational outcome of the battlefield, and I think the Iraqis know that. They can be a terror weapon, they can be a nuisance, they can slow certain elements, but they never had the potential to change the operational outcome, to stop the movement of forces. So we believe that constantly suppressing their capabilities and yet the inexorable advance we've had to Baghdad is what does it.
Their backs are against the wall now. What capabilities do they have left that you're concerned about? You're not going to be moving in maneuver warfare now. You're going to be massed around Baghdad.
There are a lot of unknowables, Tony.
Sure. What's left, though?
Well, that's it. They may have a bit of all of that left. Logically, now that we are at Baghdad Airport, they wouldn't use chemical and biological weapons because we are right amongst their population. But they have not fought logically from the beginning, and so we in no way discount the possibility they will. They also could use car bombs. They could have, in fact, left chemical and biological weapons at locations that have been bypassed. So we've got to be ready for the entire spectrum of capability.
Thelma, next to last.
You mentioned the significance of the airport. I wondered if you could outline the significance of the airport, not only of the symbolic significance of taking it, but also the military significance in terms of the size of it, its location on major roads, its proximity to Baghdad, and if you could just outline the significance.
I'd just say one thing. It is hugely symbolic. That's not why we go in and do things. And one thing that is significant about its location is what is near and what is around it. A lot of leadership sites, palaces, we know there are underground complexes that the forces are working their way through. So it's a big complex. It clearly had a lot of leadership activity in and near and around it, and that's what we're focused on.
And you can't discount that. That was clearly a big component. In the short term, its value as an airfield is not critical because we had already shut down its ability to the Iraqis to be an airfield. It gives us great capability as time passes. It's too early for us to use it for air operations at this point.
In terms of its location on major roads, and what about other military advantages it gives you?
Well, it's a great location on the southwest portion of Baghdad to allow us to posture ourselves around the city or to move into the city.
Tori, could I ask you?
We'll do Jeannie.
So much has been made. This is to free the Iraqi people. What kind of concern is there right now? You have U.S. forces on the gates of Baghdad at the airport. The people inside, though, millions of people are without power, 100-degree weather, some without water, and now you're saying they could face intense fighting in their streets. Can you describe what kind of concern there is right now for the people inside Baghdad, and if anything can be done about that?
Oh, I think the last 2 weeks have demonstrated the concern we have for the Iraqi people, including the people in Baghdad. We have chosen every one of those targets in Baghdad with great care, and the way in which they were struck was done with great precision and great care to save as many lives as possible. We deliberately didn't target some things because we didn't want them to be without power, without water, those sorts of things. We did not have the power grid as a target.
Are you concerned about any kind of humanitarian crisis within Baghdad?
That's why you see ever-increasing numbers of coalition forces bringing in ever-increasing amounts of humanitarian assistance. That's why you see us working so hard to demine the waterways so we can get humanitarian assistance in. And there is such a huge contrast between our approach to the people of Iraq and the civilians of Iraq in particular, and the Iraqi regime. I mean, every single day you see another demonstration of the care and the compassion of the coalition forces and what they're doing to protect the Iraqi people and protect them from the regime itself. There's absolutely no comparison. So what you will see going forward is continued efforts to save and protect the Iraqi people from that regime. Thank you.
Brigadier General Stanley McChrystal and Tory Clark finishing the daily briefing at the Pentagon. A couple of key points that they mentioned. Number one, the status of the Republican Guard. 6 total divisions. Now 2 of them are essentially destroyed. And the remaining 4, as they're explaining, are pretty much very confused that each of them has been significantly degraded in some way, shape, or form. But basically, all of them are way down from their top shape. 2 have been effectively destroyed, and the 4 are significantly degraded, saying that there's no cohesion in their overall defense. But also, the Pentagon is saying that so far they've been unable to shut down Iraqi TV. That's why we've been able to show you those pictures of Saddam Hussein that have just been broadcast today. A couple of things, other things, the use of special operations. They described some of their placements all over the country of Iraq, saying this is the widest use of special operations in conflict ever. And also the question of weapons of mass destruction. The Pentagon's still not taking that for granted, making sure that they are ready for any unconventional use of WMD as we get closer and closer to the end of Saddam Hussein's regime. Stand by for more news at the top of the hour. This is a Fox News War Alert. Anti-aircraft fire is being heard once again over Baghdad as coalition forces move in to liberate the city. Iraqi TV today, in fact, just moments ago, is showing what looks like Saddam Hussein taking a tour of a bombed-out area in Baghdad. There's no way to tell if this man, who you're seeing in the center of your screen, is in fact the Iraqi dictator, since he's been known to use body doubles. But if it is Saddam Hussein, and if he is still alive, how does the coalition plan to deal with him? As we speak, the commander-in-chief is meeting with a group of Iraqi Americans, people who are telling him their horror stories and suggesting to him ways to get this country back on its feet once it's been liberated. Hi, everybody. I'm Linda Vester, live in New York. It's 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 11 a.m. Pacific, and 11 p.m. in Baghdad. You're watching special live coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to have you with us. We've just gotten word once again that a presidential complex in the center of Baghdad has been struck once again. A complex that Qusay, one of the sons of Saddam Hussein, Qusay Hussein, has used. It's been repeatedly struck, and once again in the past couple of minutes it's been struck again. Now, at the same time, and you're looking, by the way, at live pictures of downtown Baghdad, and you'll be able to see some tracer fire. This is anti-aircraft artillery, what's left of it, and as we see more of it, we'll go back to it. In the meantime, in the past couple of days, Iraqi TV has been airing video of Saddam Hussein. Well, today, it showed him reading a written statement, well, purportedly from him, and these statements over the past several days have been largely written off as lame attempts to prove he is alive in charge. Well, now, today, things got a little different. The scenes aired today, one of which you're seeing right now, a little more intriguing. They follow an address by Saddam Hussein in which he refers, apparently, to recent developments in Operation Iraqi Freedom, specifically the downing of an American helicopter. So as coalition forces are tightening the noose around Baghdad, the world once again is asking, does this prove Saddam Hussein is alive? Is he in charge? And what will it take to get him? We're going to take you live to our correspondents all around the world, including those who are embedded with U.S. troops. We're going to start with Simon Marks. He's live in Amman, Jordan. Simon?
Hi, Linda. Well, in the old days before this war began, Iraqi television always used to be all Saddam all the time. The people of Iraq had gotten used to seeing their president on television since he acceded to the presidency back in 1979. Then the war started. We didn't see so much of Saddam Hussein. But tonight, suddenly, out of the blue, Iraqi television again reverted to type. Saddam Hussein back on television screens across Iraq. The most recent pictures, these, were transmitted just around an hour hour and a half ago, a man purported to be Saddam Hussein, we can't tell you for certain whether that is him or not, wandering around downtown Baghdad. Now, we do know that these pictures were indeed taken in Baghdad, because in some of these scenes you can see a memorial that we know is a memorial in Baghdad to Iraqi friendship with the Palestinians. We also get a sense in that picture that you saw briefly there of some fires blazing behind the man purported to be Saddam Hussein walking around the centre of town, and it would suggest that these pictures have been taken relatively recently, perhaps since the bombing of Baghdad began. And as Linda reported, the bombing of Baghdad continues tonight. Perhaps coalition forces trying to send a psychological message to the Hussein family by once again launching strikes against that presidential palace used by Qusay Hussein. You can see anti-aircraft tracer fire lighting up the night sky. Much of Baghdad tonight still plunged into darkness, so it's impossible to know how many people in Baghdad actually saw those televised images of Saddam Hussein. They were the second time today that we had seen Saddam Hussein on Iraqi television, or a man we think might be Saddam Hussein. Earlier in the day, in a televised address to the nation, the Iraqi president, looking tired and haggard and reading from notes, called on his people to rise up and resist the ongoing US assault against Baghdad. Strike the enemy hard, he said. Strike the enemy with force. He said that the military campaign was going exactly as he had expected. It was not concentrated in any one area, and he called on the residents of Baghdad to emulate the example of other citizens elsewhere in the country and try to resist the advance of US-led forces. Now, what's telling about this videotape is that it contains a time reference. During it, Saddam Hussein makes specific mention of a downed Apache, a US Apache helicopter that went down back on March the 23rd. The Iraqis say it was shot down by a peasant farmer with a rifle. Saddam Hussein mentions that incident in this videotape. So the important aspect of this tape that everyone is now debating is that it appears to imply that the Iraqi leader survived that first night of airstrikes on downtown Baghdad and was certainly alive as recently as March the 24th. Now, as for all the fighting that has occurred over the past 24 hours at what used to be called Saddam International Airport, renamed today by US forces Baghdad International Airport, the country's information minister has insisted that all of that is just a propaganda plot by the United States. He said, if you've seen the movie Wag the Dog, in which American forces wage a fictional war that is then shown coast to coast on American television, then he said you'll know what kind of propaganda the Americans are pulling off at the airport. He did, however, issue a chilling threat to US forces gathered at the airport, saying that Iraq planned to use non-traditional methods of attack on those US forces, though he denied later that he meant to imply Iraq might use weapons of mass destruction. Instead, he spoke about operations aimed at securing martyrdom for those people carrying them out, another threat perhaps to launch terrorist attacks against US forces. But we should note that the Minister of Information in Baghdad has, over the past several days, increasingly become the Minister of Misinformation. Just yesterday, he was telling the world that US forces were not massed anywhere near Saddam International Airport. Now, across this region, the images of Saddam Hussein that have been played on Iraqi television are being very widely seen, transmitted again and again and again by the various pan-Arab regional television networks. We don't know how many people saw them inside Iraq, but they seem determined on the Iraqi side to use these images to try and build support for Saddam Hussein, to try and communicate to the Iraqi people and to the broader Arab world that he's still alive, he still has some level of control, and that he is still giving the American forces a run for their money. And in this part of the world, while it's not a message that goes down well back in the US, it is a message that plays well in the living rooms down on the Arab street behind me, where many people oppose war and many people will privately be glad to see some pictures of Saddam Hussein tonight. Reporting live from Amman, Jordan, Simon Marks. Linda, back to you.
Simon, thank you very much. I want to explain what you're seeing on the right-hand side of your screen. These are live pictures that we continue to take of downtown Baghdad, and you've been occasionally seeing the past several minutes some anti-aircraft artillery fire. We're going to continue to let you to see that, and as soon as we have some sound, I'll pipe down so you can hear that. But at the same time, we've just gotten some information Right, you can, and this is purely of noises from the street. But at the same time, we're just getting this in from our senior White House correspondent, Jim Engel, who's been checking with U.S. officials about reaction to that recent videotape just shown today on Iraqi TV of Saddam Hussein out on the street in Baghdad, apparently among a crowd. Well, you know, is it Saddam Hussein? Is it new? Well, here's what Jim has found out from senior U.S. officials. They're saying that intelligence analysis so far of this tape suggests the tape is recent and genuine, in part because of the smoke that is seen behind Saddam Hussein in the sky behind him. I don't want to take too much of it, but that's just the information that's just coming out of our White House team as the Bush administration is saying, well, it doesn't matter right now if Saddam Hussein is alive or dead, because in any event, his regime soon will be toppled. At the same time, the president is meeting with some people who are watching this video very closely and watching the Saddam Hussein video very closely. White House correspondent Wendell Goler is live on the North Line to explain the meeting. Wendell.
Linda, the president is meeting now with Iraqi exiles. That meeting intended more to illuminate the horror of life under Saddam Hussein's regime than to plan for an Iraqi.
David? I think you'll be hearing, I hope from me later in the day, a preliminary assessment of the voice on the broadcast tape. And that, in a way, is the most interesting one in intelligence terms, because there he does speak about something that happened after March 19th, and that would be sort of more definitive proof that he survived that attack and is still alive and still trying to be in charge. Wolf? David Ensor, thanks very much. Let's go to Judy in Washington. Judy?
Thanks, Wolf. We want to go quickly to a Time magazine correspondent, Simon Robinson. He is with some coalition forces southeast of Baghdad. Simon, as best you can, tell us what area you're in and what you're seeing.
I'm traveling with the 7th Marine Regiment. We're around 30 kilometers southeast of Baghdad. It's nighttime here. But when we rolled up the road from the southeast this afternoon, there'd been heavy fighting along the road, pushing into Baghdad. Mostly the fighting was done by the 5th Marines. And when they got to the point where we are now, encountered heavy resistance. And military officials believe that the fighters, enemy fighters, included Jordanian and Egyptian mercenary fighters. I don't have any information on how they know that, but that's what they believe. Also, other examples of asymmetric tactics on the battlefield by enemy fighters, including a truck laden with explosives driven up to a tank and exploded next to the M1 Abrams tank used by the U.S. Marines.
Simon, just how much resistance have the Iraqis, and now you're saying there are Jordanian and Egyptian mercenary fighters involved, how much resistance are they putting up?
Well, the resistance is built the closer to Baghdad that the Marines have driven. I would say along the... I didn't witness the fighting today that the 5th Marines carried out, but a lot of it, if it's anything similar to what I've seen over the last couple of days, a lot of it looked like we saw dead, destroyed tanks, Iraqi tanks and Iraqi artillery pieces along the road. So the resistance, say 50 kilometers out, didn't seem to be that strong, but the closer that we've come to Baghdad, the resistance has grown stronger.
Even with that, and again, we're talking with Simon Robinson with Time magazine, it sounds as if you're saying coalition forces have continued to move forward. They haven't been necessarily slowed by any of this.
Absolutely. The last day, momentum has picked up, if that's possible. This morning we were planning to move with the Marines some of the way toward Baghdad, and around lunchtime, local time, the order came down that, in fact, we would be pressing on even further because of gains due to the fighting that the 5th Marines carried out today.
And how close would you estimate you are to Baghdad now from the southeast?
Roughly 30 kilometers. So we're on the outskirts of the city.
And are you continuing to move tonight, or I don't know whether you can say that or not?
There's fighting currently going on. In fact, if you'd spoken to me 5 minutes ago, you would have heard artillery going overhead, hitting enemy positions, and also providing some illumination for the Marines. Where the 7th Marines are currently holding positions, So there's a small pause, I would say, but fighting, it's not going to be a long pause.
You running into any civilians who are reacting one way or another?
A lot of civilians along the road today, some heading south, seemingly out of Baghdad or the suburbs of Baghdad, but a lot out just on the road, inquisitive, wondering, I guess looking at this military machine moving through their towns and villages and into the suburbs. Some were cheering and clapping and to see U.S. troops, but I would say on the whole, to be fair, most were just inquisitive.
Simon, we are reading Newswire reports of thousands of Iraqis said to be in vehicles, perhaps some on foot, moving, as you just said, away from Baghdad, most of them going to the east. So it sounds like you're seeing some evidence of this.
That's true. I saw a lot on foot today. Definitely hundreds that I saw on the 2-hour drive from where we were earlier in the day to where we are now. And a lot of vehicles filled with people. Of course, the problems that causes is that the roads are congested, and the Marines need all the road they can get for supply trains and to move combat elements up. So as the Iraqis push south, they tend to be pushed off the roads, and they drive on the curb.
Any casualties on the part of the coalition forces?
Not today that I know of. I can
that normal people do in hand.
Battalion that I am embedded with, fought in a town southeast of Baghdad called Al-Qut, and there were 4 casualties. 1 Marine was killed and 3 were injured in fighting.
Simon Robinson with Time Magazine on the phone with us. He's with the 7th Marine Regiment getting closer to Baghdad. He said right now they are some perhaps 30 kilometers southeast of Baghdad and moving closer, encountering some resistance, but none of it slowing them down. Well, getting back now to those pictures we've been looking at very closely of Saddam Hussein today in 2 different settings.
The most recent dispatches are crossing from reporters on the ground. More explosions in the suburbs of Baghdad. 3 large blasts heard close to central Baghdad as well. So they're lighting up the early morning sky inside the capital city, which is now being visited by coalition troops. Let's tighten up the grip on Baghdad now, says the United States military and the coalition forces. We have Team Fox coverage of the war in Iraq. Jennifer Eccleston live in Amman, Jordan. Wendell Golder live at the White House. But first, Major Garrett live at the Pentagon. And Major, has word reached the Pentagon? Are they talking about the fact now that, in fact, the coalition is inside the capital city?
Well, Shepard, they can see it. They can see it playing out on Fox News Channel, which is on many monitors here in the Pentagon. What I can tell you is they're seeing it, and they believe it. They didn't know exactly what happened this fast, but what we've always been told at the Pentagon is, look, as far as Baghdad is concerned, coalition forces will strike when the opportunity presents itself, and when we have the intelligence to tell us that a strike at a certain part of the city would be advantageous to us and disadvantageous to whatever forces are in front of us. And that's as specific as they ever got here at the building, is that we'll go in when we believe we can win and win decisively. What we'll do with that victory, we'll tell you later after we achieve it. So that may be what we're seeing playing out now, selective raids to achieve a certain objective, to be explained. But Shepard, even amid all this very, very good news, certainly significant territorial gains, there's yet another reminder here at the Pentagon, and I've just been handed this release a mere moment ago, about the perils that all coalition forces continue to encounter throughout the Iraqi theater. Let me read it to you right now. 2 U.S. Marine pilots were killed in the crash of their Super Cobra attack helicopter in central Iraq at approximately 12:18 a.m. Saturday morning, Iraq time, says Central Command. Preliminary indications are that the crash was not the result of hostile fire. The cause of the crash is under investigation in Shepard. Names are being withheld pending the notification of the next of kin of those very brave Marines. Moving on. You mentioned, Shepard, that there is bombing on the eastern edge of Baghdad. There's a very good reason for that, because coalition aircraft have moved their attention in that direction to pound what remains of the 3 remaining Iraqi Republican Guard divisions. Not that they're all there, but at least one of them is there, and the coalition forces want to pound them into submission before the ground forces make that final and possibly ultimate assault. In the last 24 hours, coalition forces have carried out 560 bombing raids on these Iraqi ground forces, the eastern part of the city a key focus. As for Saddam's beloved airport, which carries his name and stands as one of the most visible national and international symbols of his dictatorship, well, now it's a teeming base, as you indicated in the open, of coalition military operations, specifically special operations. Those are crucial to not only suppressing what remains of armed resistance, but also isolating the political dictatorship that still runs the show in Baghdad. And outside of the city, coalition forces continue to shred what remains of those Iraqi Republican Guard divisions, with simultaneous, as we've seen, air and ground assaults. Here's Major General Stanley McChrystal from the Pentagon Briefing today.
We believe that overall, each of those remaining 4 divisions has been significantly attrited to this point, significantly degraded.
On the weapons of mass destruction front, 2 potentially significant discoveries. First, these bottles of what is called Taban, a chemical agent that dates back to the 1940s. Special operations teams found them at a facility near Mudassis, west of Baghdad. The coalition believes this facility to be a biological and chemical warfare training school. Coalition forces also moved on what is described as Iraq's largest military-industrial complex. And what did they discover? Manuals written in Arabic describing chemical warfare, vials of the nerve agent antidote atropine, and thousands of vials of a white powder. Tonight, senior defense officials tell Fox the substance is not a chemical weapon or a synthetic toxin. On the northern front, coalition forces continued to pound positions near Mosul, and Central Command said that coalition forces for the first time had now sealed off any northern escape route from Baghdad to Saddam Hussein's hometown of Tikrit to the north.
Tikrit is an area that's very important to the regime and to certain regime leaders. We know that. We have interests regarding the regime in Tikrit. That's why you saw some targets that have addressed regime facilities in Tikrit. We certainly know that there is a link between Baghdad and Tikrit, and we have taken actions to influence that link in a variety of ways.
So Shepard, coalition forces in the north, pressing in from the east, pressing in from the west. The target, of course, the city of Baghdad. And exactly how the operations are being carried out and to what objectives, we're trying to find out. When we know, we'll let you know.
All right, Major Garrett at the Pentagon. Major, a few questions for you. This astounding news that now coalition forces are inside Baghdad, and not just the Marines, but also the Army have made their way into the city. General Thomas McInerney, who is a Fox News contributor and war analyst for us, and was on Special Report with Britt Hume tonight, and said that there would be periodic forays into the city. You mentioned targets of opportunity. Can we take from this that the Battle of Baghdad is to begin, or is this something on a much smaller scale?
You know, Shepard, we really shouldn't speculate. Clearly, with the size of force that the 3rd Infantry Division and that 1st Marine Expeditionary Unit can bring to the outskirts of Baghdad, they can separate off units and go in to achieve objectives as they believe they are necessary. I don't know all the intelligence on the ground. None of us here at the reporting level in the Pentagon know the intelligence that's led to the various operational decisions that are now playing themselves out. But we've always been told when those opportunities present themselves, and let's be honest, what is the #1 goal? What is the #1 objective? It is the leadership targets. And we were told by an Air Force statement tonight that leadership figures in Iraq are being killed by coalition bombing raids. The leadership is the key. It's no longer territory. It's no longer artillery. It's no longer tanks. It's people. People at the top who make this regime run. Perhaps that's what's going on. It's a bit too early to speculate. But clearly, they're taking advantage of something they've seen on the ground with intelligence gathered from Special Operations Forces who've been there a good long while. I won't say all 16 days, but longer than the 3rd ID or the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force have been on the outskirts.
Clearly, we'll check back with Major Garrett if there are new statements from the Pentagon regarding this. For the first time, troops are inside Baghdad. First on Fox and only on Fox tonight, the troops have gone inside the city. Here's what we know. I was telling you about General Thomas McInerney, who mentioned tonight on Special Report with Britt Hume that there will be periodic forays into the city to take out certain Iraqi targets. What kind of targets? Iraqi positions, Iraqi fortifications, command and control centers, communication facilities, anywhere that they think there might be senior leadership of the Iraqi government, means to communicate between senior leadership and troops out in the field. Any way that they could organize from such positions, those will be taken out as the opportunity arises. This is not to say that we've moved into Baghdad and will be staying in Baghdad and are beginning this hub and spoke campaign. It's not to say that at all. It's also not to say that that is not happening. I can tell you that shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning in Baghdad, for the first time in this conflict, American troops are inside Saddam Hussein's capital city, and explosions are happening all around. General McInerney made much of the highway that leads from the airport into the heart of the city, talking about how it is that that highway can be used. As you know, it's a superhighway like you might see in any major city in the United States. Think of this as a city of 4.5 to 5 million people with 6-lane superhighways running into and out of it. That's what the main highway from the airport is. It is a wide open space. That means you can move people in and out quickly. It also means that you are an open target for any of these Fedayeen Saddams or any of the other paramilitary groups that may be on the side, any of the terrorists, as the Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld called them. Should they be off to the side of the road but in striking distance of our vehicles or our people, they could take them out on the route from the airport. So the possibilities tonight are numerous that in fact they've gone in from other areas. The 3rd Infantry is now inside Baghdad, as is a group of United States Marines. For the first time since the war began, the capital city has been penetrated. We'll be checking in just a moment with our embedded correspondent, Greg Kelly, who's inside, and our embedded contributor, Oliver North, who is inside Baghdad. They'll be able to hear those explosions as they're happening tonight in the suburbs of Baghdad and in central Baghdad itself. This is Fox News Channel's continuing coverage of the war on terror and the war to liberate the Iraqi people. And first on Fox tonight, the coalition is inside the capital city.
I guess the lead is that while the war has gone very well from an American perspective up to now, they're really coming to the most difficult phase of it.
They're coming to a point where they need to consolidate or surround the city of Baghdad?
Well, they certainly need to consolidate, build up their combat power, and as you know, a persistent, repetitive theme of mine is that they don't have all that much of it in terms of ground forces, but they certainly need to add something to what they've got. But then my sense is that the concept is not to lay some indefinite siege to the city and try to outweight the regime. The goal is to destroy and collapse the regime, and that means launching attacks inside the city involving ground forces and airstrikes.
This task force Tarawa, of which this artillery brigade is a part, artillery battalion, pardon me, is a part. The mission is to defend the backside, to keep an eye on any possible Iraqi forces that might be to the east or west of Baghdad that might try to circle back in, and also to control the communication and supply lines back to the south, back to Kuwait. And thus far from the position where we've advanced to now, we've seen absolutely no combat. Although there was some fire overnight, which has not been identified, the commanders believe there might have been some artillery fire coming from some unknown location, and they have yet to exactly identify that, but it didn't hit any coalition forces, didn't cause any casualties in this particular vicinity, and we're told that there's a good chance that we'll continue advancing north as the forces continue moving toward Baghdad.
Have you been avoiding contact on your travels with civilians, or is it just that no one is coming out to fight?
Well, they've been avoiding contact with civilians so as not to be bogged down in the civilian communities. And the population is not nearly as dense down here outside of Baghdad as I'm sure it is as you get closer, so it's easier to avoid that. But we have been brushing much closer to civilian populations than we did traveling through the vast desert areas. And yesterday, coming into the position where we are, the road was lined with civilians, young boys and young men trying to sell cigarettes, trying to peddle Saddam money to the American Marines, and evidently they had some idea that those are the kind of things Marines were going to want, because there were a lot of them out there trying to sell. But our commanders instructing the Marines to avoid that. avoid buying cigarettes, Iraqi cigarettes, or buying or trading Iraqi money. But there were some folks out trying to make a buck, so to speak, yesterday.
All right. Besides the regular Republican Guard, which are called the elite Republican Guard, a total of approximately 15,000 of those. They're not organized fighting units like the Republican Guards. They're the best fighting units, and they are in disarray. General McInerney saying tonight that even if the regular Republican Guard remnants have fallen back into Baghdad, they're not trained for urban warfare. So much of what comes ahead is an unknown. Do these elite and special Republican Guard units cause problems for weeks and months to come? Or does the resistance die because of overwhelming pressure and because the message gets out that we're not there to steal the country, but that the coalition is there to return freedom to the Iraqi people and to remove this brutal regime? Lots of questions tonight, and one big one, and this one's just from me and an aside. When do you get that television station and change the images that are being broadcast to all around? Images of Saddam Hussein hitting the airwaves twice a day on Iraqi television. But the same old question, is it really he? We'll be discussing that in the time to come. We'll be looking over that, and eventually we'll go to Jennifer Griffin, or actually Jennifer Eccleston, who's live in Amman, Jordan. But certainly following up on the headline tonight, and that is that these forces are inside. We've just spoken with Greg Kelly, whose video phone is having a little bit of trouble, but we believe we'll be able to get him back up and on the satellite in just a matter of minutes. He's in the middle of a firefight even as we speak. It causes some troubles with the technology from time to time, but our engineers say they're confident they'll be able to get him back at some point. And we'll speak with Colonel Oliver North, who is with the Marines inside Baghdad. If you're watching us tonight in the United States, it's a headline you'll get on just one network. Inside Iraq and inside Baghdad for the very first time. Stay with us. Team Fox coverage continues in a moment.
This weekend, the battles, the humanitarian aid, and toppling Saddam's regime. How are our troops faring? Answers on Fox and Friends Weekend.
Right now during Lobster Fest.
The first part was a little slower than they thought because they were ambushed in the rear by these paramilitaries, and they had to kind of redirect their attention to that problem. But then once they contained that problem, the next phase was fighting a Republican Guard, and the Republican Guard just collapsed under the weight of air power, essentially, and some of the long-range firepower. And there have been some tremendous battles over the last few days, completely one-sided. If you just go by the BDA, the battle damage assessment that the military is turning in. I mean, 2 days ago, the 5th Corps reported engagement in which, according to their statistics, they killed somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 Iraqi soldiers and maybe had a handful of casualties on their own side. Yesterday, they almost routinely they put the dead on the Iraqi side at 400. And a fair number of tanks, and the Marines had similar figures. So there was some resistance. It just was, there was some fighting. It just was pretty much one-sided as these armored forces or combined armed forces took on these so-called technicals, these paramilitaries with trucks and SUVs, and also Iraqi armor that was just overmatched. So the paramilitary phase slowed them up, but the Republican Guard basically it really collapsed under the weight of the air and land attack, and now that's brought them to this third and most difficult phase, the urban warfare piece.
Michael, thank you. We're about to put a piece of that urban warfare piece in play. A significant moment now in this 2.5-week-old war. We go to CNN's Walter Rogers to report it. Walter?
Hello, Aaron. U.S. Army sources have now confirmed that 3rd Infantry Division's tanks are now operating within Baghdad itself, inside the city itself. We have known about this for a while, but have not been allowed to report it until this moment. But the 3rd Infantry Division now has tanks, several units of tanks inside the city of Baghdad. It's described as a reconnaissance mission. Again, we know what their objective is. I don't think think we should report that at this point, but they are inside the city of Baghdad, and as we look at the maps, it appears as if they are trying to carve up chunks of the city, one chunk of the city at a time, one zone at a time, again, so that a firm control can be established. But there is no question now that the elements of the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division are now operating with their tanks inside the city of Baghdad. We've seen the maps. We know exactly where they are. They punched up from the south. We cannot disclose what their ultimate objective is. Aaron?
Well, thank you. General Clark, weigh in here.
Well, I think it's the old principle of gaining and maintaining contact with the enemy, Aaron. And there was a lot of talk about surrounding Baghdad, and somebody said maybe we'd put it under siege in effect. But actually what's happening is the troops are continuing to advance. When they don't meet resistance, they're careful, they're cautious, they're maintaining security, but they're continuing to advance. And the thing that's really astonishing is how robust and well sustained these Army forces are. They're rolling forward day after day, they're in contact every day, they're in danger every night, and they're continuing to roll forward. And I'd also point out that there's a lot of good air-ground coordination in this, because the Army couldn't be doing this without the Air Force overhead and those close air support tactical air control parties on the ground with the lead troops. But this is the forward movement, this is the pressure, this is what's going to cause the Iraqi regime to crumble.
General, thank you. We'll take a break, and our coverage continues in a moment.
Information Minister Mohammed al-Saif, who yesterday said that U.S. and coalition forces were nowhere near Baghdad, nowhere near the airport, saying today that U.S. forces there at the airport are surrounded by Iraqis, that it will be their graveyard. He also said that the Iraqis are using unconventional acts to defeat the enemy. Asked at a news conference where he made this statement whether that meant weapons of mass destruction, he said no, it meant simple acts of martyrdom, and he promised the Iraqi people at this press conference that those acts of martyrdom will take place tonight, beginning today and into the future. Back to you, Shep.
Jennifer Eccleston live in Amman. We'll get back to you. Jennifer, thanks a lot.